Night of December 11th to 12th, 1942. The Gironde Estuary, deep inside occupied France, more than 60 miles upriver from the open Atlantic. Two folding canvas canoes, each barely 18 inches wide and paddled by two men in blackened faces and rubber suits, drift silently past anchored German patrol boats and shore batteries toward the docks of Bordeaux, one of the most heavily defended ports on the entire French coast. There is no armor here, no engine, nothing but canvas stretched over a wooden frame and the nerve of the four men aboard. By the time they are done, working in freezing water within touching distance of the holes above them, they will have clamped limpet mines to the sides of enemy blockade runners and begun paddling back downriver into the dark, hoping the darkness holds long enough to put distance between themselves and the explosions to come. Of the 10 men who set out from a submarine 5 days earlier in 5 of these canoes, only 2 will make it back to Britain at all, and they will do it on foot over the Pyrenees months later. Winston Churchill would later say the raid these 10 men carried out shortened the Second World War by 6 months. By late 1942, Bordeaux had become one of the most important ports left open to Nazi Germany's war economy.
Blockade runners sailing from Japanese-controlled territory in the Far East delivered raw rubber, tungsten, tin, and other strategic materials Germany could no longer easily source by any other route, now that the Royal Navy controlled the surface of the Atlantic and most of the wider seas around Europe, with roughly 25,000 tons of crude rubber alone passing through the port in a single year. Cargo Germany's own war industries had no other reliable way of replacing. Conventional attack was effectively ruled out. Bordeaux lay far up a heavily patrolled river estuary, well beyond the range of a normal naval raid, its approaches watched by shore batteries, searchlights, and patrol craft, and RAF bombing accurate enough to hit ships moored in a working port without leveling the French city built up around them was not considered realistic or acceptable, given the civilian population living alongside the docks. Major Herbert Blondie Hasler of the Royal Marines Boom Patrol Detachment proposed an answer that struck many at combined operations as close to fantasy. Insert a small number of men by submarine off the French coast, have them paddle folding canoes upriver under cover of darkness, attach limpet mines to the blockade runners by hand, and then escape overland through occupied France into neutral Spain. The plan depended entirely on stealth rather than force, because force was never an option available to it. A folding two-man canoe, framed in wood and covered in canvas and rubberized fabric, had no weapons worth mentioning, no armor, and barely enough buoyancy to carry 2 men, their explosives, and days of supplies.
Naval and combined operations planners understood perfectly well that any of the estuary's patrol craft, searchlights, or shore sentries could end the mission in seconds if a canoe were spotted. There was no version of the plan that included a fight the raiders could realistically win if discovered, and the operation's own briefing acknowledged frankly that the chances of everyone involved returning alive were slim at best. 12 men in 6 canoes, codenamed after sea creatures, catfish, crayfish, cachalot, conger, cuttlefish, and coalfish, trained for months in silent paddling, night navigation, and limpet mine handling, on the understanding that the entire operation's survival depended on never being seen at all. Each limpet mine had to be pressed by hand against a ship's hull below the waterline and held in place by magnets before its timer was set, work that meant lying alongside an enemy hull in freezing water for as long as it took to fix each chart securely, with no second chance if a mine slipped loose or a sentry happened to look down at the wrong moment. The submarine HMS Tuna carried the raiders from Holy Loch in Scotland, releasing them off the mouth of the Gironde on the night of December 7th and 8th, 1942. One canoe, Cachalot, was damaged getting through the submarine's hatch and never launched, cutting the raiding force to 5 canoes and 10 men before they had paddled a single stroke. The estuary mouth itself proved almost as dangerous as anything the Germans could have thrown at them. Unexpectedly heavy seas and a strong tidal race capsized 2 canoes almost immediately. Conger's crew, Corporal George Sheard and Marine David Moffat, were thrown into the freezing water and died of hypothermia before they could reach shore.
Coalfish was lost in the same conditions, and cuttlefish became separated from the group entirely. The survivors from both crews came ashore only to be captured within days. That left 2 canoes, Catfish, crewed by Hasler and Marine Bill Sparks, and Crayfish, crewed by Corporal Albert Laver and Marine Bill Mills, to continue the 60-plus mile approach alone, paddling by night and hiding motionless under camouflage during daylight hours as German patrols and French river traffic passed within yards of them. On the night of December 11th, 4 days after leaving the submarine, the 2 remaining canoes reached Bordeaux's docks and worked along the hulls of anchored blockade runners, fixing limpet mines below the waterline on timers set to detonate hours later, then turning back downriver before the explosions gave them away. If a raid carried out entirely on stealth, with no realistic backup plan if anyone was spotted, is the kind of naval history that keeps you coming back to this channel. Subscribing costs nothing and brings the next one straight to you. The limpet mines detonated as timed, damaging around 5 German blockade-running ships in Bordeaux harbor, sabotage inflicted without a single shot fired at the moment of attack itself. But the raid's cost fell almost entirely on the men who carried it out. Laver and Mills in Crayfish were captured attempting their own escape, and along with the survivors of Coalfish and Cuttlefish, were executed by German forces under Hitler's commando order, a directive issued that October mandating that captured commandos be treated as spies and saboteurs rather than prisoners of war, denying them any protection under the Geneva Convention, regardless of the uniforms they had been captured in.
Hasler and Sparks alone reached the French town of Ruffec, roughly 100 miles inland, where they made contact with a resistance escape line run by Mary Lindell, a British-born countess who had already spent years helping downed airmen and escaped prisoners across the same route, and would later survive capture and imprisonment in a German concentration camp herself. Lindell hid the 2 Marines at a nearby farm for 18 days before arranging guides to walk them on foot across the Pyrenees into Spain. Hasler flew home from Gibraltar on April 2, 1943, nearly 4 months after paddling away from the submarine. Of the 10 men who had launched into the Gironde, he and Sparks were the only 2 who ever saw Britain again. Hasler was awarded the Distinguished Service Order and Sparks the Distinguished Service Medal for the raid. Lord Louis Mountbatten, head of Combined Operations, later called it the most courageous and imaginative of all the raids ever carried out by the men of Combined Operations, a striking assessment set against a cost of 8 men out of 10. Winston Churchill went further, crediting the disruption to Bordeaux's blockade-running trade and the psychological effect on German confidence that no port, however distant from the sea, was truly safe, with shortening the war by as much as 6 months, an assessment that could never be proven with precision, but reflected how seriously the raid's strategic ripples, both material and psychological, were taken at the highest level of British government, a remarkable claim to make about an operation carried out entirely by 10 men in folding canoes.
Operation Frankton became a template for what a handful of men in unarmed, unarmored small craft could achieve against a target no conventional force could safely reach. And it directly shaped later Combined Operations doctrine around small boat and canoe raiding for the rest of the war, influencing the training and employment of similar detachments in other theaters. It also became one of the starkest illustrations of the price the commando order extracted from operations of this kind, since capture, not combat, was what actually killed most of the men who did not come home. The raid succeeded operationally and destroyed itself demographically in nearly the same stroke. The story was told to the wider British public only after the war, and it later inspired the 1955 film The Cockleshell Heroes, the name by which the raid and its participants have been known ever since. None of what happened on the Gironde that December was decided by anything resembling a specification sheet. On paper, a folding canvas canoe with no weapons and barely any buoyancy had no business operating 60 miles up one of the most heavily defended river estuaries in occupied Europe, let alone reaching its target and getting most of the way back out again. What the specifications could not measure was months of training in absolute silence, a willingness to lie motionless under camouflage for entire days within earshot of an enemy patrol, and a readiness to keep going after losing 4 of 6 canoes before the mission had properly started. Bordeaux's harbor defenses were built to stop ships, aircraft, and saboteurs who needed to be seen and heard to do their work, guns to sink boats, searchlights to find them, patrols to intercept them.
They were not built to stop 2 canvas canoes, paddled by hand in total silence, that were never detected at all until the mines they had left behind began to go off.